It may seem a bit obvious at first glance taking a GMC Canyon into a dusty canyon trail, but the views are certainly pretty good, don't you think? Besides, this is the 2022 GMC Canyon AT4, the most off-road ready Canyon we've ever seen from General Motors, and so this is the perfect place to give this thing a little shakedown and see how it does on and off-road. So let's knock out the basics first. The Canyon is GMC's entry-level truck positioned below the larger Sierra. With this off-road inspired AT4 package, you can get this thing with a crew cab that's a 4-door, and you can get it in either a 5-foot or a 6-foot bed. This test truck has a smaller 5-foot bed. It makes it look really punchy in person, very aggressive. The AT4 pack, as you might expect, adds some nice off-road goodies. First things first, we have a center locking diff for the 4-wheel drive system. Then we have AT4 specific 17-inch blacked out wheels on 31-inch Goodyear Duratrac all-terrain tires. Then there are a couple other smaller but really welcome goodies like the red colored tow hooks in the front and the back, and the rock sliding rails in the sides of the truck, which is a bit ambitious, but they certainly do look quite tough. The suspension's been upgraded as well with a leveling kit to bring the front and rear ends up to parity. Oh, and engines? Well, there are two choices there. Normally with a Canyon you can get an entry-level 4-cylinder, but that is skipped for this more high-performance AT4 model, instead locking you into either a turbo diesel 4, which has a pretty meager 181 horse, but a massive 369 pound-feet of torque, or this. This is a 3.6-liter V6 engine that produces 308 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque. With either engine, you are locked into an 8-speed automatic transmission and of course 4-wheel drive, as I previously mentioned. But how does the AT4 do off-road? Well, fortunately for you and for me, I'm having a lot of fun up here because I'm on this little off-road trail like to test trucks and all-wheel drive vehicles on. Now, it's not too hardcore. I'm not going to get this thing super twisted up. But the AT4 handles this trail really well, though I suspect, as is the case with a lot of vehicles, these chunky Goodyear tires are doing the majority of the work here. Though still, you can feel the 4-wheel drive system tugging and pulling this thing out of the steeper ruts whenever I do drop a tire into them. That said, the AT4 is not a super hardcore off-roader. It's definitely a truck that's geared for a nice even split of off-road capability and on-road civility, which I appreciate because after all, the GMC brand is a luxury brand. Though you might not know it from the inside of this cabin. More on that in a sec. If you want a more hardcore off-roader, well, that's really what the Chevy Colorado ZR2 Bison is for. Instead, I suspect a lot of people who opt for the AT4 pack on the Canyon really will do it just because it looks so good. I mean, wow, this one in the red metallic paint with the black trim just looks so sharp. And so it is cool to know that if you do want to do the occasional bit of off-roading on a truck that looks quite nice, that's really where this thing shines. Not knocking its capabilities, but just being honest about the user base and the demographics who are going to buy this thing. Let's be realistic here. As fun as it is getting trucks dusty and dirty, this thing has to work on the road, like I mentioned, because that's where the majority of owners will be putting their miles on these things. And there are some good things to talk about here. First things first, living in LA, I have to mention the fact that this thing, despite the higher ride and the big tires and the center locking diff and the fancy 4-wheel drive system, has a great turning circle. It's actually quite impressive how tight of a corner this thing can cut. Speaking of corners, as you might expect, these chunky all-terrain tires do not inspire much confidence on a winding road like this one, but that's fine because anyone who buys this truck understands that. No one's going to be doing limit handling in their Canyon AT4. The tires, similarly, do contribute extra road and wind noise at higher speeds. That's just sort of an inevitability with all-terrain tires. But again, if you're buying this truck, you probably know that. The ride quality is also quite nice as well. Despite being a box frame pickup truck on chunky tires, it does ride pretty nicely. It's no Toyota Camry or anything, but for what it is, it's pretty comfortable. This thing's also rather quick, though there's a huge asterisk to that performance. You see, this 3.6 liter V6 is an absolute screamer. It'll do 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds, which means Ford Raptor owners who aren't paying attention at a stoplight might get dusted by the little GMC here. But as fun as this V6 is, at the end of the day, it's a car engine. You know, this is the Camaro V6, and GM hasn't really made any substantial changes to it, taking it from a car-like platform into this truck platform. What I mean by that is if you look at, say, the revised Nissan Frontier, that has a VQ V6 similar to what you'd find in a 370Z sports car, but they bored it out and they retuned it for more down-low torque. Versus this thing, it's all top shelf power. And this thing revs to 7 grand, which is really exciting, and it makes a pretty good noise. But that top shelf power means it's not really going to go anywhere until the revs are at least over 4,000 RPM, which wouldn't be a problem except for the 8-speed automatic transmission. Not only is the gear spread definitely geared towards economy, but the calibration, the tuning, it wants to keep the revs low at all times. Even when you mash the gas, when it needs to drop 5 gears, it may only drop 3. And so it never really feels as quick as it is. You know, if you get it just right, you knock the shifter down to low and you start in first gear off the line, it's really quick. But if you just drive around town, it never really feels that fast because of the transmission holding it back. It definitely feels like the calibration for this transmission was geared more for that optional turbo diesel with all that down low torque. And the problems don't end there, unfortunately. This AT4 costs 47 grand as tested, yes, for a Canyon, not a Sierra. And that's kind of the going rate for an off-road ready, exciting, nicely equipped truck these days. Look at the Ford Ranger, Tremor, or Tacoma TRD Pro or whatever. They're all right around the same money. But for 47 grand, this truck has some real question marks thrown up when it comes to the day-to-day comforts and conveniences you might expect. Now, sure, this AT4 has leather and heated seats and heated steering wheel, and that's all very, very nice. But it's a bit of the old GM plastic fantastic, isn't it? It doesn't really feel like that nice of an item in here. And the interior is almost a one-for-one knockoff of the less expensive Chevrolet Colorado upon which the Canyon is based. I mean, look at the photos of a Colorado interior and look at the photos of this Canyon's interior. It's the same exact thing, but there's a bit of leather on the dash here for the Canyon versus the Colorado, which is just plasticky. Now that means the Canyon inherits some nice things that I like in the Colorado, like this upgraded 8-inch touchscreen display. It has functionality like Bose Audio and Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but the main thing is that the interface for this system, a combination of a touchscreen and physical controls, is really nice and easy to use. What's a bit more surprising is what the Canyon doesn't have despite the 47 grand price point. Features like a key fob. This has a physical key to turn it in the ignition. How old school, it's very quaint. But more prominently, it doesn't have keyless entry. On a 2022 vehicle, what gives? But the GMC apologists out there will say, but the Canyon's been around in some form or another since 2014. You know, its bones are 8 years old. But 2014 wasn't that long ago. Longtime viewers of the channel will know that I once owned a salvage title Toyota Prius taxi cab that I turned into a race car. It was of the same vintage as 2014, and guess what? Despite costing basically half as much when new, it had keyless entry too. No excuses there. But those are nitpicks in the grand scheme of things compared to some really unexplainable head-scratching stuff happening in the interior. This truck has optional wireless charging, but the pad is too small for just about any cell phone. I have an old Samsung Galaxy S10, not a big phone at all. It does not fit in the charging pad. My wife's iPhone, even worse, it doesn't fit at all. If you have a modern-sized cell phone, this is a complete waste. It doesn't work. Then there are more sizing related hiccups. All the cup holders in the front of this thing are very, very small, which is an odd thing for an American truck. If you have a big gulp or anything, it's not going to fit in here. And I point that out just because the two cup holders for the back seats are much larger for some reason. They're normal size, so that's really confusing. And then there's the general lack of storage in here you'd expect from a pickup. Despite being a big lifted up truck, it's a little tight in here when it comes time to actually store things. If you look at the door cards, for example, they have cup holders, but they're so tiny that not even a Coke can will fit in there without falling out. And the more you poke around the interior, the more you'll find small instances of stuff like this where things are the wrong size or in the wrong spot. And you have to wonder, did GM put an actual human being in this truck before listing it for sale and saying it's good to go? And I find all this rather frustrating because, like I mentioned, the Canyon seems like it should be a great truck. It looks so good and it's pretty comfortable for the day-to-day drive. And there are things like the fuel economy, which even with this upgraded 300 plus horsepower V6 are pretty nice. You know, this thing is rated by the EPA at 17 mpg city, 24 mpg freeway, and I'm happy to report that after a week of driving, that's 307.4 miles, I achieved a real-world figure of 19.2 miles to the gallon, kind of right there in the middle. And so for an everyday truck, that's actually pretty good. Fortunately, the redemption arc is right around the corner because, like I mentioned, this truck's been with us in some form or another since 2014, and finally a next generation model is coming for 2023, and that gives GMC the opportunity to smooth out the rough edges and give us a much nicer experience. Because if you fix what needs fixing and do slight small tweaks to the stuff that's already good, this will become a truly fantastic little truck. But that's then, and this is now. The GMC Canyon AT4 as it sits is a good truck, just not a great truck. Fingers crossed they get it right for the next one. In any case, guys, my name is Jake. You've been watching Drive, Brake, Fix, Repeat, and I'll see you guys next time where I go do more fun things with cars. Bye.